Alright guys, QI Phase 10. This one is going to be a little bit longer than Phase 9, but I am going to try and make it as quick as possible. Please hang with me, because after Phase 10, our, our city is completed structurally, so you won't have to listen to my voice anymore. So that's a win for you, and it's also a benefit to me because I don't have to make these videos anymore after this. So hang with me on this one. My collection is not for another hour, but it's getting late for me, so I want to do the bulk of this video before the actual collection, just so when I do collect, I can make the changes that I've already talked about, and go spend some time with my wife and go to bed. Okay. Phase 9 was extremely boring. The only thing I did was delete a butcher, plant a ballista that I did not rush, because we will have space to leave this ballista planted and just disconnected in our city for at least a few rounds now. So I planted the ballista, ran 2 cycles of troops, and then upgraded 1 house to a cottage. So pretty boring overall. The main thing that I accomplished was printing enough troops to sustain my progress in the map, and then leave enough resources to do the changes that we're going to do this round and the final round. So 33 over 81 troops. I have some actions, so I don't know where I'm at. I think I'm on this one actually. Let's try this out real quick. So ballista are still holding up pretty well. We're on level 5 difficulty. Against the horse combos, I like 2 ballista and 6 archer. We'll try that. 8 archer also works pretty well. So we'll try this one first, and then, yeah, so 1 dead archer, 1 injured. Not a big deal. 25 shards, that's cool. Shards is one of the things I want to talk about in this video. There's more ballista. Ballista are still holding up pretty well at level 5. Cool. There's the other horse combo. So you can also try 8 archers. If I get this pattern again, I'll show you some legionnaire possibilities as well. So 2 dead archer with that combo, but archers are a lot cheaper to print, remember? So that's not a bad option either. That's just the straight 6. That's not the full pattern of 8. You can do a couple legionnaires just to be bullet sponges. You'll end up losing like 1 archer versus the 2. Yeah, so we still lost 2 in that scenario. The legionnaires are pretty good bullet sponges though. So we're out of actions now. Let's jump back into settlement. Point though was army. The troops that we have printed in the last few rounds, we've printed a cycle of archers basically at every collection. So yes, we're killing them, but we're kind of slowly accumulating like 3 or 4 per cycle, and so we kind of have a reasonable surplus at this point. If we lose 20 archer per day but print 30, we're still ahead of the game. Okay. My farm number 1 is ready to collect. It's actually been ready to collect for a couple hours. I did not rush the initial construction, so that was ready a few hours. The building was built a few hours before my collection this morning, and then the production timer has finished a couple hours ahead of the buildings that I'm about to collect. Makes sense. We have full happiness, so let's go ahead and collect that. Just get it out of the way. So nice balance on the resources there again. So the ultimate goal of Phase 10 is to get our 8th expansion, and I'm going to explain the importance of expansions 6, 7, and 8 in a second. But the goal of this collection is to get our 8th expansion for 240 goods cost, right? And we have this goods building planted in anticipation of that. Our collections are around 240,000 coin, and then 280,000 supplies, but just keep in mind I collected that goat farm, so it'll be 200,000 supplies this round. So around 330 supplies available, and then 370 coin available. So plenty to run that goods building, and we'll actually have enough left over to plant one arch, as well as our last repetition of Ballista for a while before we move that into a permanently disconnected location as well. So that's the budget for this round. I am going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to buy my 8th expansion with shards instead of using my resources, and primarily for the purpose of the video. Normally if it was just me playing it and I'm not trying to make a YouTube video, I would wait the 2 hours until my most of my buildings are going to pop in an hour, but I still have a few that are 2 hours behind, and I don't really want to be making this video at 10 o'clock at night. So normally I would just wait until 10 o'clock at night, do the collection, make the changes that I want to make, and go to bed, right? But for the purpose of this video, where I've got to explain some of these moves, I'm going to cheat a little bit and buy this expansion with shards. Which actually kind of adds to the content of the video, because the first thing that I want to talk about is shard consumption. So I started out this season with enough ascended buildings planted to buy my first expansion with goods instead of shards. So I bought my second and third expansions with shards for 100 plus 150. So I only spent 250 shards on my first 3 expansions. Normally that's not the case though. Normally I do not have those ascended buildings planted. Like, obviously they do expire, and unless you have gobs of them in storage, that's not going to be something that you'll be able to do every season. So in a typical season, I buy 100, 150, and then the 200 that I just bought for expansion number 8 would actually go to expansion number 3 early on. So in a roundabout way, the 8th expansion purchase that I just made is actually kind of balanced to the true system, as Inno is bringing out more and more QI boost buildings more consistently and more frequently. So I think as these next few events go on, it would not be unusual to see more buildings that give a permanent boost of QI goods at the beginning of the incursion. So that's part of the reason why I use that strategy for this video series, was so that you have a foot or a blueprint to build that system, with the idea that you have extra goods at the opening. Does that make sense? Throughout this video series, I've also spent around, I think, 250 shards, maybe somewhere in there, 250, 300, something like that, rushing buildings that I would normally not rush, just for the sake of doing the video, like, this is the next building that you're going to plant, but instead of stopping the video, coming back an hour later, trying to remember my train of thought, and then going through the rest of the process, just accelerate the building, finish the video, you know? So I had, in a roundabout way, okay, I had a bonus expansion this round, where normally I would have spent 200 shards to buy this 3rd expansion on a typical season. I also would not normally spend the 250 shards that I have spent this season rushing buildings, because I normally don't make a YouTube video for every single day that I play QI. I am doing this series as a tutorial for people that have asked me to explain the way that I'm building QI, because once you see the output of this, it's actually a pretty legitimate system. So I get teammates that are looking at my QI output going, holy cow, dude, what did you do to accomplish that, right? So for the purposes of these videos, I'm spending shards to accelerate buildings, but normally those shards would go to a 3rd expansion, because normally I would not have the ascended goods to get the freebie, right? In addition to, so that's kind of a wash, right? That's kind of a wash. I spent 200 shards on this 8th expansion that I was originally going to generate with goods, right? That was the purpose. 6 days left, and you watched me burn up 30,000 actions. I got 25 shards in the process, so pretty consistent average of about 100 shards a day. I should be able to stockpile at least, I don't know, 600 shards by the end of the season. I don't know. I'm done spending shards or diamonds or anything like that. At this point, I will use what I generate and just recycle it perpetually. But I'm not going to invest into it. I don't really care for some of the mechanics of the new system. Overall, I like the idea, and I am going to do a separate video on that. Overall, I do like the concept. I just don't like the mechanics of it necessarily. So I'm just going to reinvest the shards that I'm getting as I go. I'll start out with 600 at the beginning of next season, which is enough to do my bare bones 475 shards consumed for city design. That's 1, 2, 3 expansions, and then rush the initial goods building for 25 to get expansion number 4. That is my bare bones budget for city design, for settlement design, and it's worked like a dream for the last however many seasons, and it's actually working even better now in this new system where there is kind of a shard kibosh, right? So overall, pretty sustainable shard consumption. I've spent more shards than I normally would this season on rushing stuff. But I normally would not rush those things, and then I've also spent the shards that I would have spent normally buying expansions with shards. Makes sense? So our next expansion cost is 250 shards. If you pull up your expansion cost and your next expansion costs 1,000 shards, you and I are playing two very different games. You know what I mean? Okay, so shard use was topic number 1. Topic number 2 is disconnected archer. I've talked about this in every single phase so far, and you guys underestimate how much you can actually snowball your resources by having this stupid little 2x2 permanently tucked into a roadless location. Okay, I run 1 or 2 cycles of archers basically every collection, and if I don't have, it's okay. So let's say I just have that permanently connected to a road, and this is a tile house. I'm losing 10,000 coin every single collection just having this Z building sitting right here on a road, right? But as we go through these buildings and we're like, okay, this is a butcher. We'll say that's butcher, right? We're going to delete the butcher and we're going to build a tailor. But before we build the tailor, we're going to grab the archer that has been built from phase 2, slide it onto a road, run 2 cycles, move it back into its little pocket, and then plant the tailor that we're trying to plant this around, or whatever, right? Having this permanently planted over the last 10 phases has saved me roughly 75,000 coin and 35,000 supplies on the cost of building the archer, but then an additional 25,000 coin on 10 repetitions of deleting the archer and rebuilding the tile house. Does that make sense? So I've emphasized that in every single video, and I'm going to emphasize it again. This disconnected archer is actually a huge money saver in the long run, and pennies make dollars, right? Especially in QI. You're not dealing with 84 billion coin like you have in your main city. You're getting down to the nitty gritty where in some of my phases I didn't have enough to plant a road, right? For most of the season, we've also not had a permanently planted butcher disconnected or connected. But for this cycle, and there was a couple other cycles where we did overlap, plant the ballista camp at the end of a collection, use however many leftover resources from that collection to run one cycle, use the surplus resources that we can calculate from the upcoming cycle to print one more repetition, delete it, replace with the butcher. But for the most part, the permanently planted ballista is not a thing either. I normally don't have a permanently planted goods building, but on this layout, just considering where the obstacles were and the expansions that I placed, I didn't have room to use this as flex space. This was kind of locked in as a 3x3 spot. Normally not ideal, but it worked for this variation. So on that note, I'm going to springboard into expansion placement. Expansion 1, this is your normal city grid, right? Expansion 1, 2, 3, and 4. 5, sorry. My spacing is off there. Here, I'm going to change that just because it will mess with the, yeah. So I always plant expansion 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Whatever. You get the idea. This is 5. You get the idea. I always plant those 5 expansions in that location. It doesn't necessarily have to be the right side though, and I'm going to come back to that, but I always plant those 5 expansions in that location. And let's look at what we're getting out of those locations. So in this adaptation, this season, I've ended up with this this arch on the bottom row here. But normally this house would not be here, this house would not be here, and this ballista house combo would actually be a farm connected off this single piece of road right here. The Taylor on the inside is connected by this road pattern that we set up. And then this Taylor, or this farm and arch up here would be the result of expansion 5. So on this right side, we would always have 1, 2 Taylor, 1, 2 farms, 1 arch at the top, 2 arch, and then all of our housing pattern is the same over here. Every single season. This layout will leave exactly 2 empty squares, which would be 1 and 2 on the left side of this arch behind this farm, 3 and 4 on the right side of this house, as long as it's paired with a butcher. But once we replace that combination with a farm, those empty spaces would be eliminated. So with the 5 expansions that I consider mandatory, which would be this footprint, you'll end up with 1, 2 empty squares on the left side of the arch, and 0 empty squares after that. Even the arch has a purpose that could potentially be empty space, right? That potentially would be empty space. That'd be 4 wasted squares. But even the arch in that position has a purpose. You'll end up with 2 empty squares off of the first 5 expansions. The purpose of expansion number 6 is to create additional housing, as well as additional support for housing in terms of happiness. So in this adaptation, where this expansion happened to land, we planted housing and happiness. And the housing that we added is cheap, right? The happiness that we added is enough to sustain multiple upgrades for housing in the main city, right? That's expansion number 6. Expansion number 7 is for the purpose of farm number 3, which we've created up here. At the end of this cycle, everything, all the structural changes that we're going to make to the city will be permanent from here on out. My city is done being built from after this phase, which is actually kind of why I rushed that expansion, because this is the culmination of everything that we've been doing so far. The location of expansion number 7 and number 6 might vary from season to season. You know, maybe you got these expansions over here, these expansions over here. The end goal is the same no matter what. Expansion number 5 is just part of the layout. Expansion number 6 is to add housing, so population and coin is what we're adding, as well as happiness to sustain the population that we're adding. That's the purpose of expansion number 6, and the purpose of expansion number 7 is to add supplies. So 5 is layout, 6 is coin and happiness, 7 is supplies, every single season. The only variation is going to be where those actually happen. So let's say your city grid is just absolutely riddled with obstacles on this right side, but your left side is free and clear. Okay, so mirror this town hall image and build on this side. Does that make sense? Let's say all of the expansions, like I've planted 2 expansions up here, but let's say this whole top side is filled with obstacles, but the bottom side is clear. Mirror your town hall vertically. So instead of this pair of housing and Taylor on the front of my town hall, we would mirror that image and put the pair of, we'd shift our town hall down 2 additional squares and put this group in the back, and then mirror this group to the front and expand down here where there's less obstacles. Does that make sense? So the pattern is the same, and regardless of where your obstacles are, like actually looking at my current city, this left side is actually relatively obstacle free compared to this right side. So I could have actually mirrored my town hall and expanded on the left over here. That would have been an option. The way I did it worked out pretty well though. So expansion 5 is like a fixed reference point, but you can rotate this city orientation, put your town hall and your Taylors on the left side and run your houses off to the right. Flip it upside down. There's a lot of different ways to do it based on where those obstacles are. So expansions 6 and 7 are not necessarily specific locations. Like if there's 12 obstacles in here on the upcoming season, I'm probably not going to pick that expansion, right? But if this expansion is free, I can rotate this entire layout and run this pattern into this area. Does that make sense? The main criteria that we're looking at with expansion placement is that all of the expansions that we add after number 5 are coming off of roads. So we have one road coming down off the town hall. We have one road coming up. We do actually have two single pieces of road that could be extended to the right. And then we have 2 longer roads extending off the left. So whatever expansions that you're after are coming off of one of these locations of the town hall. We do have a road coming down here, but I don't recommend targeting this expansion because the purpose of this road coming down right here is to connect a full-size building in this location. If you run that road through that location, you'll end up with some housing in here that you probably don't need or want in order to connect whatever it is behind it. So I would not recommend this location. Even though there is a road coming off of the town hall there, I would not recommend that location for an expansion. And last but not least, the purpose of expansion number 8 is flex space. And for now, we need that flex space because we're still trying to generate troops. We're printing enough, we're sustaining enough troops per day to keep up with the map. And you guys have watched me do a couple auto battles. I'm definitely not wasting ballista. I get a few injured here and there. Every now and then I get 1 dead. But for the most part, ballista are keeping up. Archers pretty consistently killing 1, maybe 2 per auto battle. But you can only do like 30 auto battles per day if you use all your actions as it is and don't buy more with shards, right? So if we're doing 30 battles, killing 1 per battle, worst case scenario, we're going to kill 30 archers in a day. So if we print 40, we're slowly stockpiling that. Does that make sense? But as these levels get increasingly harder, Tomorrow we'll be killing 3 archers per battle, and then the next day we'll be killing 4 archers per battle. And the donation nodes for troops or goods or whatever isn't going to be 1 good per movement, it's going to be 3 goods per movement or whatever. So we do need this expand or flexibility space. That's expansion number 8 is flex space in order to print productions from various buildings that we have planted in our city and disconnected from the road. Like the building itself is not super expensive to plant in the grand scheme of things. If you delete it and rebuild it every single cycle, that's going to be a pretty huge waste of resources. But if you just plant it once, it's really not that expensive. The main issue with planting, deleting, rebuilding ballistas, archers, goods buildings, anything like that, there's an hour delay, so it's going to mess up your next collection. And then if you do that cycle every single round, like I said, it ultimately does become a waste of resources. So having this flex space and being able to pull these buildings from the disconnected areas in the city, run a few repetitions of troops or whatever, is going to be a time saver as well as a resource saver as we get into these higher levels of QI, where the 30 ballista that you have in your army is not going to get you, that's going to get you like 2 fights on difficulty 10, right? And then all your troops are dead. So having the ability to slide that in to this location pre-built and maximize the number of troops that you're getting out of that production, because you're not spending the resources to build it, is actually going to be a benefit in the long run. Okay, so that's it on the expansion side. As far as happiness goes, the traditional system that I was exposed to when QI first came out, someone presented a QI strategy that I looked at and I was like, okay, I don't know what QI is, so I'll follow that and see what happens. Absolutely terrible. The strategy revolves around partial collections of butcher or tile houses, delete, replace with amphitheater to finish whatever's left of your city. And here and there, that's not really an issue. I think I've done that twice, maybe 3 times throughout my 10 phases. That's not a huge issue, but if you repeat that pattern multiple times over multiple different collections, each repetition of that is between 3,500 coin or 5,000 coin, depending on what you're deleting and rebuilding. So we'll call it 4,000 coin on average. If you do that pattern twice per collection, over multiple collections, you'll be able to buy a farm on like a bonus farm. I mean, we've already planted 1 farm, right? You would actually be able to buy a bonus farm by your 8th collection just from the amount of coin that you're wasting on deleting and rebuilding amphitheater. So, that said, if you rewind all the way back to my QI phase 1, the very first building that I plant is an arch. I didn't even plant roads yet. I didn't even buy my expansions yet. The very first, I think I did buy my expansions actually, but the very first building that I planted was this arch and exactly in that location. That arch has not moved in 10 phases so far. And that arch in that location has allowed me to avoid deleting and rebuilding sets of amphitheater over and over and over and over again throughout the season. Along those same lines, the strategy of planting a farm or a villa early on, or even at opening if you have the resources to do that, the strategy of that is to, well, we need supplies early on, so we're going to plant the farm. We have the resources to plant the farm, send it, right? That's the strategy behind it. Same concept with the villa on the coin side. The problem with both of those strategies is that early on, when your city is only producing, 40, 50,000 of each resource at collection, you've consumed a 4x5 space that is absolutely fruitless on the next collection unless you rush the construction of that building. So you're planting the farm at opening essentially forces you to rush the construction of that building. I've rushed the construction of a handful of buildings throughout this series, and for the most part, it was like arches, archery camp, ballistas, goods buildings, things that I would not normally rush because I plant them at the end of a cycle, leave them planted until the beginning of the next cycle, finish doing whatever I need to do with that, and then delete it. and replace it with a butcher or whatever. So those are buildings that I would normally never rush. But having to rush the construction of a farm or a villa simply to even break kind of sort of even on your next collection is two steps forward, one step back, like I've said before. The big problem with the farm is the just absolutely absurd coin cost to build it, where we don't have the happiness to justify upgrading our housing to replenish that coin. That's the big problem with the farm. The big problem with the villa is that it provides actions, right? It provides a ton of actions compared to a tile house, but you don't get to capitalize on those actions until it's actually built. So once it's built, you'll be getting a huge amount of actions per hour more than you started with. But in the early stages, when you're fighting on level 1 or level 2 difficulty, you have 10 hours of time where that villa is not generating actions, right? And then later on in the game, where we don't really need actions as fast as possible because we don't even have the troops to execute those actions, right? That's a good time to plan a villa and you don't need the actions. You can wait for the resources and then take the extra resources to build more arches, more victory towers in order to actually be effective when you are using those actions. Does that make sense? But early on, you deprive yourself of 10 hours worth of action accumulation. Potentially don't get the coin collection unless you rush the building. Again, same principle with the farm. And the other downside with the villa is that your happiness may be perfectly balanced when you plan it. You know, oh, we're perfectly balanced. Let's delete a tile house, plant the villa. But then when you start the next collection, even though the villa is not actually collectible, right? Assuming you don't rush it, you just let it cook. The villa is not collectible at the beginning of next collection. We have exactly 0 happiness available. So let's say this tile house is a villa that is 30 minutes away from being cooked. As soon as that finishes cooking, I'm not going to be able to collect coin off of it, but all of a sudden my happiness is out of whack. Does that make sense? So that pretty much sums up the few main topics this round. I am trying to keep this short, and I wish I could give you guys like an Excel spreadsheet of a blueprint design, but it's just not accurate or consistent city to city. If I tell you to print these 5 expansions on this side, only this side, plant these buildings, and only in that location, you're going to end up, I mean, I like to expand on the left side, right? But these expansions just are not ideal. The last expansion that I cleared was 75 shards. I'm guessing these are, I don't know, 90, 100, 120. I don't know what they cost. I don't really want to find out. But if I give you guys a recipe that depends on that, I think I'd be steering you wrong. So I get that these videos are long, but ultimately there is a lot of variables in how you build your city after the first 5 expansions. And I don't want to misguide you guys and say that you have to plant farm number 3 in this location. I chose to plant farm number 3 in this location based on where the obstacles are, but that's not always going to be where that expansion lands. The main principle is that at the end of the season, with very few exceptions, I end up with 3 farms, 9 Taylor plus or minus 1. Depending on where the expansions land, I may end up with 1 less Taylor and extra housing. So plus or minus 1, 9 Taylor, plus or minus 2 probably, so plus or minus 2 out of 14 houses. And depending on resource consumption throughout the season, most of these will be villa, with a few cottages scattered about, but 14 houses, 9 Taylor, 3 farm, plus or minus 1 on the Taylor house balance, and then usually 7 arches by the end of the season. So plenty of happiness to upgrade my remaining cottages into villas if needed. Usually just run out of time before we get to that. But a pretty stupid surplus of goods and troops by that point. So at that point, we're collecting around 450k of each resource, and plus or minus 50 on each category. So it might be 400 coin over 500 supplies or vice versa, but pretty consistent in the 400 of each resource range. And that's enough to print as many ballista as you're going to kill on level 10. Like, you're going to run out of actions before you kill all of the troops from that collection. Does that make sense? You're going to run out of goods, or you're going to run out of actions before you run out of goods if you're printing them at this kind of rate. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's get into the shuffle that we've prepared. Our collection is coming up here soon, I think. Yeah, like 11 minutes. Let's get the shuffle done. I'm not going to narrate a whole lot. Theoretically, we just bought this expansion with goods, so we're done with goods buildings. I am going to give myself the freebie there. And like I explained at the beginning of this, the shard consumption rate that I've done in this series is more than I usually would do. But even at the rate that I'm going, it's still pretty sustainable. So we've deleted that goods building, slid this tailor over to its connected spot. So we have a gap of 3x4 there. So that would potentially be another tailor, but we don't have space for the road to connect it. Okay, hear me out. This location up here is eventually going to be a farm. So we have a pair of arch, house, and road. There's 6 squares there that is eventually earmarked to be a farm. Once we put a farm in there, we're not going to have room for these arches. But hey, look at that. That's kind of, that makes sense, right? So now we have room for this 4 wide building with a gap of 2 at the end. Okay. The expansion that we just created up here will require a road connection, so we've got to move that house up by one tile, and our disconnected archer doesn't have a home now. But we've got to rearrange this group back here to fit a farm in the long run, and we'll end up with a gap of 2. So we're going to slide that house over, right? This tailor would eventually become replaced by the farm, but for right now I'm going to slide that tailor into temporary place. We are done with this house for sure. We are done with probably most of this road material, but like I've said before, I really don't like to delete those until I know for a fact that I'm done with them, and that's going to be very end game when I start replacing these with victory towers and stuff. But for right now, if I need to slide in a couple pieces of road here and there to make some adaptations, they're 1,000 coin a piece, so I would much rather just leave them in these temporary locations, right? From here, we have room for a butcher that is connected by a road, and once we replace this pair with farm number 3, the house that will connect farm number 3 is actually right here. So farm number 3 will come up to that location and then down to the back of the ballista and connect it on this single piece of road. So for now, we have the space to plant this temporary butcher, this pair of butcher and tile house that will eventually become a farm. We have a 1-2 gap between the ballista and the arch right there. This will eventually become a butcher. I'm not going to plant that yet because we are going to run one cycle of ballista this round from our leftover resources. We do have some surplus euphoria, but not a whole lot, so probably going to want arch number 5 in order to start comfortably upgrading all these buildings into villa. I think we're probably done with this. Yeah, what do you guys think? Which means we don't need that road. Taylor slides up. Arch comes down here. At this point, so my collection's coming up in 5 minutes. Timing's actually perfect on that. At this point, we have enough resources in the bar to run one cycle of Ballista, and we should have 240,000 in addition to that surplus that would have been the goods building, the goods cycle in order to get this expansion instead of using shards to do that. I did the shards just to make the video because I don't want to spend all night doing this. So I used the shards, but after this collection, we should have 240,000 of each resource, which would have been the next expansion. I'm going to reroute that into housing and or farm upgrades, but the math works out pretty clean there. Here's another cool thing too with this. So the pair of tile house and archer in the long run is designed to be able to delete the tile house, slide the archer up, make the archer collection, and then replant the tile house. And this is actually a net gain in coin. Tile house only costs 2,500 to plant. We're getting 9,000 coin out of it. Archer costs 5,000 coin plus 2,500 supplies to plant. So it's a lot more cost effective just to delete the tile house, slide the archer up. Here's what's cool about this little pattern though, is that we actually don't even need to delete any housing. We can just shuffle those roads over here, connect our archer, print what we need. It's disconnected 3 other buildings, but it only takes 2 seconds to print those archers, and then reconnect these roads with the disconnected archer. Makes sense? At this point, we will have 1, 2 off the back of this cottage, permanent empty space. This will become a farm. So we'll have 1, 2 empty space, 3, 4 empty space, 5, 6 empty space in the very end game after we're done printing archers, 7, 8 empty space, and then 4 over here, but the location of those 4 is going to change. Eventually we will need to slide that ballista camp back into this location. For now we can delete butcher in order to run ballista when we need to, but after we replace this butcher with a farm and this butcher with a farm, the only location that we'll be able to delete and run temporary cycles of anything is going to be this Taylor, which, I mean, kind of sucks. Like, you don't really want to delete and rebuild Taylor, but at the end game, that's not the end of the world. So after we delete this, we'll be able to slide the ballista up here. In the very end stages of this, we'll be able to slide the ballista up here, move the ballista back to its permanent location behind this farm, right? And then replant a butcher here going forward. A butcher or a pair of tile houses or whatever we need. Makes sense? So, in summary, pretty unlikely that you will ever duplicate this layout. Pretty unlikely that I will duplicate this layout, for that matter, because it really depends on where your obstacles are. I did look at this location originally for farm number 3. The problem was I only have road connections for 1, 2 buildings, so if I tried to plant this combination of tile house and archer and leave these arches would be left in the back. If I tried to mirror this farm pattern down here, I wouldn't have the road connection to connect that second house. Does that make sense? Just based on where the town hall is. If I mirrored this image vertically and moved my town hall down by 2, I would be able to use this expansion instead of this expansion. Does that make sense? I don't know if I explained that very well, but that's just what I'm looking at. Okay, collection's ready, and we do have at least one cottage that's behind. I don't think that second one is behind. It might just be delayed from the road manipulation that we were doing. I think that one's, yeah, there you go. So let's do our collection real quick. I think everything's ready except for that one cottage. The farm was behind from phase 9, so it's an hour ahead for phase 10, and that'll balance out overnight. Happiness was on point, as usual. It's weird how that works. This one's still an hour behind. So after this cottage produces, we will have 258 plus the 19k from the cottage equals 277, 250 coin. All the supplies that we're going to get out of this round has already been collected. It's 211 supplies. So we will have enough left over to run one cycle of Ballista, plant the farm that we're after, as well as upgrade one tile house into a villa, that is. I'm gonna do the Ballista and farm right now, just so you guys can kind of follow with me on the math. We only need one cycle, and we're still doing pretty good on Ballista, but before we move this into its disconnected location for probably the next couple days, let's get one more repetition out of troops, and we're not going to slide this into its usable location until we absolutely need it. Does that make sense? Let's sell this house. We're done with it. We also need to move some of these roads. There you go. Farm number 2 slides right in here. We've got some empty roads scattered around these perimeters. Until we're done making mechanical changes on the city, it's better just to leave those roads somewhere, because they are 1,000 coins apiece. So don't delete them and rebuild them, just relocate them somewhere until we're done with the mechanical changes. Makes sense? We're a couple coins short of Villa. We need 25,000 coin. We have 24,600, so we're 400 coins short of a Villa. I guess case in point, that's why we don't delete roads, right? Because we're 400 coins short of a Villa. This one will be done in an hour, though. I'm not going to record that. I'm just going to make the coin collection and then replace this tile house with the Villa. Happiness, we'll have enough happiness to make that adjustment and then have 100 happiness left over afterwards. Not a really big buffer, though. The second tile house, the only other tile house remaining, is earmarked for a farm. So after this and this, we'll be done with tile houses. We'll have 100 happiness left over, but really not a big buffer. Hence, arch number 5, right? On the supply side, though, we've got plenty. Only 100,000 supply required. We have 126 available. So after this villa, we'll end up with, like, I guess 18,000 available coin, 26,000 available supplies. Let's do the math on our upcoming collection. I am actually gonna rush this farm because I do want that to synchronize with my how cheap can you go? I mean, 250 is a little bit more cost effective, but I'm going cheap. We're gonna rush this just so it's ready for the next collection. Let's do the math on upcoming collection, though. So at the next collection, we'll get 344,000 supplies. I rushed the second farm, so That's what we'll actually get at the next collection. We'll get 231,000 coin minus the 9625 because I'm going to delete a tile house, but the coin production of the villa that I'm going to replace it with will not be ready until the upcoming collection. So we'll end up with 221,000 coin, right? Plenty of supplies left over. We have enough happiness currently to just directly replace the one tile house with a villa. No impact on happiness. And then the arch number 5 that we just planted will give us enough happiness to replace the second tile house as well as a cottage with a villa. This pair right here, this butcher and tile house, is earmarked for a farm, but right now we're behind on the coin side, so I'm actually going to replace this tile house as well with a villa instead of a cottage. Permanently, that villa will end up in a cottage location, but right now we're not in a huge hurry for farm number 3. So I think I missed some of that recording. I'll have to go back through and edit that. After the villa, we have enough happiness currently to plant one villa, and we will have enough happiness from this 5th arch to plant villa number 2 and 3. So after 3 villa synchronize, I'm not going to rush those because our current imbalance is on the coin side, but we have plenty of supplies to continue planting more villas. So there's no reason to rush the coin. We're getting 211 coin at collection, which is plenty of coin to plant a farm. So what we really need in order to balance is just to generate more coin for the sake of building coin, but not to build a farm, because we can do that at any point that we want. After these timers synchronize, though, with the 3 villa, we'll be at basically 300 coin, but a little bit heavy on the supply side. Haven't planted farm number 3 in this scenario, though, yet, with 344, so after farm number 3, we'll be up to like 420. At that point, we'll need more happiness to continue upgrading our housing. This is where we'll delete this tailor. After we've upgraded this farm and butcher pattern, this is where we'll delete the tailor. I don't know why I called it that. Ballista camp. This is where we'll delete the tailor and move the ballista camp over here. Run as many ballista as we can, possibly, like spend the entire collection on ballista just so that we can be done with it for as long as possible. And then plant arch number 6 in that space instead. Eventually we'll plant an aqueduct behind that as well, but like I've mentioned, I try not to plant aqueducts or towers until the very end stages, where your housing happiness isn't affected by those changes. Does that make sense? So I'm gonna wrap this up. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all system to QI. It depends on, there's a lot of different variables, what you're getting from the map, what you're forced to spend on the map, and that's either from donation nodes or your troop consumption rate based on the stats that your main city is producing. So that's a variable. There's the other variable, what you start with in QI, and last but certainly not least is how much you're willing to spend on QI. I just shelled out 120 diamonds, and I'm cheap. Like, you guys have watched my videos. I'm pretty cheap with this. If you want to blast through 10,000 diamonds and skip to phase 5 right at opening day, be my guest. But do it in the order that I've presented to you, because mathematically it is the most consistent and most, I guess, stable way to grow the city. The big idea here, the big takeaway, is expansions are more important early on than the elevated buildings. That elevated farm is going to take up a lot of space in a small city. But and you got to rush that building in order to even get anything out of it on the next collection. But if you spend those resources on expansions, fill that space with cheap buildings, you'll build a solid enough foundation where you can afford to delete a butcher and a tile house and not even rush the farm because you have so many other small buildings on the remainder of your city grid that are producing enough resources to print the troops that you need to sustain the map or the goods that you need to get the next expansion, etc. Right? So this concludes phase 10. This is my 9th collection, but I did have the ability to plant an arch on opening. So if you are not able to do that, this would be phase 10, but your 10th collection. Does that make sense? Monday night here for me, so that gives me a solid 6 days to just take this system that's spitting out 400,000 of each resource every collection. I'm going to take this system and just play the map for the next 6 days. So 4 days on building, 6 days on playing. And throughout the building process, we're keeping up on troops, and I've been donating a lot of troops. At this point, though, I have 51 over 72. I have enough actions to make 2 hits, so let's do that real quick. There's 1 dead, whatever. No deaths, like actually no injuries even from that one. So plenty of troops to sustain on the map, right? And the growth that we're doing is built towards the end game, where we get into level 12 difficulty, level 10, 11, whatever difficulty they come out with, where we're into that difficulty. It's basically impossible to fight, and if you can, you're burning up 7 ballista out of every single battle. But if your city grid is based off of this, and you're able to produce 3 repetitions of ballista every day, at the absolute most, that's 30 ballista per day, at the absolute most. And if you're burning up 7 of them per fight, you're good for about 4 fights, and then you're out of troops. And your city grid doesn't generate the amount of resources that you need to replenish those as fast as you're consuming them. Does that make sense? But in this formula, we are able to use a 400,000 collection to print 11 repetitions of ballista every single collection, or 11 repetitions of good every single collection. It would actually be 20 repetitions of goods. You get the idea, though. Start slow and start with the cheap stuff. Buy the expansions, expand the cheap stuff, and then by day 4 or 5, you will be able to upgrade to the good stuff in bulk, right? Like we were able to do farm, villa, ballista upgrades simultaneously in a single collection at this point. So I think that's it for this. You guys will be relieved to not hear my voice anymore, and I will be relieved to stop talking at you. For posterity's sake, let's check my shard and goods expense on expansions. I'm going to keep building up my city with my upcoming collections, but at this point it's just copy paste, right? We already know we're going to plant a farm here. We already know we're going to upgrade these to villa. In order to do that, we need another expansion. That's just copy paste at that point. I'm not going to record every single collection from here. By phase 10, so 10th collection, it's my 9th collection, but I had a head start with the arch. But 10th collection for everyone else, it is possible to build this system and this city in 10 collections. The shards that I've used to rush or rush construction or production of buildings are normally things that I would spend on actions in the map instead, and I'm only rushing those things for the purpose of making these videos. So if you have a 0 diamond budget in QI, you can build this city in 4 days. Does that make sense? So going forward, I'm not going to record my collections. I will do a small footnote at the end of the season and record maybe my last 2 or 3 collections just in a time lapse. So you can see the amount of resources that I'm generating and where I'm spending them, if that makes sense. I think that's it. This series, I know that some of these videos are long. I'm sorry. This series was kind of a favor to good friends and guildmates of mine that were struggling in QI and just getting frustrated with it. Honestly, it is an annoying process in a sense. Like, I mean, if you're used to a Titan city, this exercise is kind of annoying in a way. I get that. So the purpose of the series was actually to help you guys get better at it. I know some of these videos are long, but if you've taken the time to watch them and if you've gained anything out of it, that's really all I care about. So, all right, guys. God bless. We'll talk later.